Number 10. Bucket List. A 19-year-old woman from Homestead, Florida was arrested back in early 2022 for trying to escape an officer. Afterward, the suspect, Jania Shamiracle Douglas, confessed to a Monroe County Sheriff's deputy that getting arrested had supposedly been on her bucket list since she was in high school. For her thoughtless actions, she was charged with eluding and fleeing. According to the police report, the deputy that arrested her witnessed the driver of a Toyota brand sedan driving recklessly and speeding on Card Sound Road around 7:47 a.m. When the deputy turned on his patrol car's sirens and lights, Douglas refused to pull over and instead just kept driving southbound until she was eventually stopped at a three-way intersection. As a result, the young woman was sent to jail. The outcome of the case, though, has yet to be seen. Number 9. Drunk Bus Driver. In March of 2023, a school bus driver from West Virginia veered off the road with 50 kids on board and almost crashed after getting behind the wheel drunk. 33-year-old Casey Dodrill admitted to drinking after failing 3 sobriety tests, according to local news outlets. He told officers that his reasons for committing the crime was because he had a lot on his mind. Dodrill was seen driving erratically with students from Golly River Elementary and Richwood High School. A teacher's aide from the county school district was the one who filed a police report. The aide told dispatchers that Dodrill had swerved off the road. The driver reportedly blew a .118 on a breathalyzer test, which is way over the legal limit of .08 in West Virginia. Melissa Adkins, the personnel director for Nicholas County Schools, told reporters that they were handling the matter very seriously. She explained that parents put their children on a school bus every morning and that they have every right to trust that the driver will transport their kids to and from school safely. Dodrill was arrested on a DUI charge after the incident, and the case is still ongoing. Number 8. Don't call the police. In 2010, a 27-year-old man from Bridgeport, Connecticut robbed a Fairfield bank. For his crimes, he was sentenced to 9 years behind bars. Albert Bailey did the one thing you shouldn't do before a robbery. He called the business beforehand, telling them he was on his way. According to Howard Stein, the senior assistant state's attorney, the police got a call from a worker at the People's United Bank on March 23rd. The employee said that they'd just spoken to a man who demanded $100,000 in large bills over the phone, who also said that someone would soon come into the bank for the money. The polite robber asked them do not call the police because they were monitoring the police scanner. Bailey apparently told the worker that he wasn't afraid to take hostages and could easily turn the place into a bloodbath. Without the robber physically in the store, though, employees were able to easily lock the bank's doors. But they were unaware that Bailey's cousin, who was only 16, was already inside. The bank then got a second call from Bailey where he asked the bank worker if she saw his associate. Meanwhile, the man's cousin had silently placed an empty briefcase on the teller's counter. Still on the phone, Bailey then instructed the employee not to make a scene or else they'd start taking hostages. So a teller placed a wad of cash in the briefcase, and afterward, the cousin then met Bailey in the parking lot of some nearby condominiums where he was waiting in a getaway car. Luckily, the authorities showed up right as Bailey was driving away. When officers pointed their guns at the robbers, they surrendered. All the stolen money was recovered and returned to the bank, and while Bailey received a 9-year sentence, it's not clear what consequences his younger cousin faced. Number 7. Zachary Tentoni. In June of 2013, a Boston thief who stole a woman's wallet inside a schoolyard was captured by the police after he accidentally left his birth certificate at the crime scene. 26-year-old Zachary Tentoni from Connecticut was arrested and charged with unarmed robbery. The victim reported to the police that she'd left the Fields Corner T station and was making her way through the schoolyard at Harbor Middle School when the robber came up behind her. Tentoni then snatched the woman's clutch wallet, which contained $40 in cash and her ID. But in the process of doing so, he dropped 2 bags of his own. He left behind hygiene products, clothes, and a pair of sneakers. But at the top of the bag was Tentoni's birth certificate, which immediately identified him as the thief. Just hours later, Tentoni was apprehended only a block away from the crime scene. He was booked into jail on a $500 bail. Unfortunately, not much else is known about this case, so it's unclear what Tentoni's punishment was. Number 6. Bad Luck Bandit. In 2018, a man known as the Bad Luck Bandit tried breaking into a business in Suitland, Maryland, but things didn't go according to his plan. Luckily, the incident was captured by the restaurant's surveillance cameras. On the 20th of September, using a brick, the thief successfully destroyed the front glass window of the carry-out business. But that's where the bandit's luck ran out. The suspect then used the same brick to try and break the glass protecting the restaurant's front counter. He unfortunately failed to notice that the glass was bulletproof, and because he didn't know any better, he tried to shatter the glass 3 times. On the thief's 3rd attempt, the brick flew back at him and smacked him in the head. After taking the hit, the suspect fell to the floor where he laid there for a few minutes. Eventually, though, he stood up and decided to leave after failing to rob the place. Surprisingly, the Bad Luck Bandit was never caught or identified, but the police called on the public to report anyone they saw with a suspicious head injury. It's now been over 4 years since the incident, and no arrests have been made. Number 5, Candace Keene. In Columbus County, North Carolina, a woman was arrested on several drug charges after the police got an anonymous tip that she was going to smoke some marijuana during a Facebook live stream in late 2021. At 9:15 in the morning on December 2nd, the local sheriff's office was told that 33-year-old Candace Keene was preparing weed to be smoked during her social media stream. So investigators reviewed the woman's Facebook account and watched the video in question. Afterward, officers showed up at Keene's home and spoke with her about the illegal narcotics seen in the video. Based on what a spokesperson for the police department wrote, Keene didn't deny that she had drugs in her possession. During a search of the woman's home, investigators found and collected a controlled prescription medicine that wasn't prescribed to Keene and an unspecified amount of drugs. After her arrest, she allegedly threatened to pee in the patrol car, which she was taken to jail in. In the end, Keene was charged with possession of drug paraphernalia and possession with intent to manufacture, sell, or deliver a Schedule 6 controlled substance. She was then booked into a Columbus County jail and her bail was set at $4,000. Some people just aren't that bright. Number 4, substitute teacher. When you're a teacher, there are a few things that you should never do, like bringing a weapon into the school. But apparently, 26-year-old substitute teacher Kiara Nashe Ansley didn't read the memo and brought a stun gun into her classroom in March of 2016. It was her first day subbing at Jefferson Davis Middle School in Jacksonville, Florida. Ansley's attorney, Dexter Davis, explained that his client felt intimidated by some of her students who surrounded her desk and were screaming at her. According to a police report, Principal Nydia Ashby was told by a student that the substitute teacher in room 730 had a stun gun. Ashby then went to the room to ask Ansley if it was true. The teacher replied that she had it in her purse. Afterward, Ashby contacted the school's resource officer, who confiscated the weapon and escorted the sub to the principal's office. Ansley had the purple stun gun in a black holster. The official report claims that Ansley showed her students the dangerous device and possibly even discharged the weapon in an attempt to get her classroom to calm down. This was supported by the fact that a student claimed they saw and heard a taser. Davis said that as the unruly students continued antagonizing Ansley, she told them that she had a taser and wasn't afraid to use it, although she never actually pointed the weapon at any children. While most people know that you aren't allowed to bring things like a stun gun into school, Ansley claimed that she didn't realize she couldn't have it in the classroom. As a result, the substitute teacher was charged with carrying a weapon on school property, which is a third-degree felony that's punishable by up to 5 years behind bars. But unfortunately, even though this incident happened back in 2016, it's unclear what happened in the end. Number 3, cyber criminals. A 15-year-old cyber criminal from Scotland was arrested by British police in 2016 after hacking into the FBI systems. Have you ever heard the saying, just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should? Well, this warning fell on deaf ears since everyone knows you shouldn't mess with the FBI. Under the Computer Misuse Act of 1990, Britain's anti-hacking law, the teenager was arrested for accessing the agency's digital material and hacking. Federal agents fled to Glasgow to carry out a raid on the 15-year-old's home before proceeding with the criminal's arrest. He faced a trial in the U.S., but his extradition was blocked by Home Secretary Theresa May under human rights laws. The operation in Glasgow happened a few months after another Scottish hacker, Gary McKinnon, was named the most dangerous hacker of all time. The suspect was believed to be an active member of a notorious hacking group called Crackers with Attitude. The hacktivists were allegedly behind a series of cyber attacks on the US government as well as its high-ranking officials, which took place around the same time. According to a police spokesman who released a statement to a Scottish journal, the young criminal has since been released from custody but continues to be the subject of a report to the Procurator Fiscal. Information on the genius hacker is hard to find, but hopefully he learned his lesson. Number 2, cop deals with marijuana overdose. In 2007, a crooked cop from Dearborn, Michigan called 911 while he was off duty to report that he and his wife had eaten too many pot brownies. 29-year-old Edward Sanchez cooked up a batch of the marijuana-laced desserts using confiscated marijuana. During the 911 call, Sanchez claimed he only used a quarter ounce of the drug but said that he and his wife had eaten the whole pan. Never before experiencing the intense high, he felt way out of his league and reported the incident only an hour and a half after eating the brownies. In the phone call that went viral, Sanchez said that he thought he and his wife were dead. The cops believed that they were experiencing a marijuana overdose and requested that officers come by his house to rescue his dumb ass. But if you weren't aware, overdosing on marijuana, even if you've consumed extremely potent edibles, is extremely hard to do and has never been reported to cause death. The blitzed officer told the dispatcher that time was passing by really slow. And then he asked what the score was for the Red Wings game that was apparently happening that night. When authorities got to the couple's home, Sanchez initially claimed his wife had taken the weed out of his police cruiser when he wasn't paying attention, but later confessed that he was just blaming her. Somehow, both Sanchez and his wife avoided any charges, but the officer resigned from his position on the force later that year. And at number 1, this baby is not for sale. In 2022, 49-year-old Rebecca Taylor from Texas was charged with sale or purchase of a child after randomly asking a mother how much her child cost while in a Walmart checkout line. The incident happened at a store near Houston. A mother and her 1-year-old infant son were buying their items at a self-checkout register when Taylor commented on her son's pretty blue eyes and blonde hair. Afterwards, she asked the woman how much the child was. The mother initially laughed at the comment, thinking it was a joke, but Taylor then said she had $250,000 in her vehicle to buy the baby. The mother refused to sell her child and waited for Taylor to leave the store before reporting the conversation to police. When the mom headed out to her car, Taylor stopped her and her baby once again. She upped the price that she was willing to pay to $500,000. She also apparently said that she wanted the boy and that if she couldn't buy him, she'd just take him instead. Even after the mother locked her and her child in the car, Taylor continued asking for the boy. Luckily, Taylor eventually got into her vehicle and left the scene, but a warrant was obtained for the woman's arrest and she was brought into custody on January 18th. She was booked into jail on a $50,000 bond, according to Click2 Houston. Taylor managed to meet her bond though, and it's unclear what other consequences she faced afterwards.
8. Linda Bishop. Single mother Linda Bishop was in her 40s when she developed a severe mental illness seemingly out of nowhere. She quit her job at a restaurant in New Hampshire, claiming that the Chinese mafia was after her, and began habitually disappearing for days or even weeks on end with her daughter, while giving false locations to loved ones from gas station payphones. Linda's family tried persuading her to get help, but she didn't think she needed it. In reality, she was becoming increasingly paranoid and delusional. And in 1999, she abandoned her daughter to live as a vagrant fleeing from the imaginary forces she believed were after her, which at that point included the government. Once in a while, Linda agreed to take medication and her state of mind improved dramatically. But she hated the pills because they hindered her creativity and made her feel like a zombie, and these periods of cooperation were few and fleeting. By 2006, she checked into a mental hospital. By then, her condition had landed her in trouble with the law on multiple occasions for volatile behavior, although she was never aggressive before she became symptomatic. She was released a year later after refusing to cooperate with treatment, and nobody informed her family due to medical privacy laws. Linda believed they were conspiring against her and wanted nothing to do with them, and unfortunately, they were powerless to recommit her to a long-term facility against her will, due to the enormous burden of proof the law requires. Linda wandered outdoors until she came upon an abandoned farmhouse that was for sale. For the next 3 months, she lived on rainwater and apples from a nearby orchard. She kept a diary detailing her daily activities, which consisted mainly of sneaking out for apples after dark and hiding inside during the day. There were neighbors nearby who would have helped Linda if they knew she was hungry, in need, or there in the first place, but they had no idea, and Linda truly believed everyone was out to get her. The apple supply ran out when the bitter New Hampshire winter arrived, so there was no heat in the house. So, sadly, Linda passed away in the dark, cold home, weak, freezing, and malnourished, thinking it was the only safe place for her to be. 7. Deanne Hastings. It wasn't uncommon for Deanne Hastings to disappear on her family and friends for a few days at a time. Ever since being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, she was very proactive about her mental health. She still experienced episodes from time to time, and sometimes she just needed to get away from it all. And so, the people in her life tended to respect her need for space as much as they reasonably could before beginning to worry about her safety. But they knew for certain that something was terribly wrong when the 34-year-old vanished from her home in Spokane, Washington in late 2015 and never resurfaced. Deanne left a note behind for her boyfriend, stating that she was having a good day and had gone to the grocery store. For some reason though, she'd left behind her ID and money. Her car was found abandoned in a local parking lot with her purse and cell phone inside. Weeks later, someone found Deanne's driver's license outside a grocery store. The following day, her credit card was used at a business just outside Spokane. Surveillance footage showed Deanne buying vodka and birthday candles. Witnesses who crossed paths with her outside the store that day said that she was distraught and asked them for help, claiming she'd been drugged and kidnapped. Police and paramedics were called to the scene, and after speaking with Deanne for a while, responding officers decided that they had no reason to hold her. She was seen on surveillance footage later that day walking with 2 men, who later claimed they met Deanne for the first time that day and hung out with her for a while. One of the men, Randy Riley, was caught using her food stamp and debit cards. He claimed he'd left her alone along a roadside due to her belligerent behavior, and that he found her cards in the same place the next day. Deanne is currently still missing. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, she was having issues getting her insurance to cover her medications. Until she's found, it's impossible to say whether her mental state contributed to her fate, although all signs seem to point toward it as a distinct possibility. 6. Denny Michael Rohan. In 1969, a 28-year-old Australian sheep shearer named Denny Michael Rohan traveled to Israel and volunteered at a kibbutz, where he and 40 others worked and studied Hebrew. The other volunteers noticed that Rohan was strange, but they were polite to him anyways. One night, Rohan began screaming out wildly in his room. He was having a religious experience of some sort that was so moving he couldn't contain his emotions. Nobody knew that Rohan had an extensive psychiatric history involving hallucinations and a 6-month hospitalization. They had no way to predict that his mental state made him especially vulnerable to a condition experts called Jerusalem syndrome, which is when tourists in Israel experience a psychotic episode marked by delusions of being a biblical figure or participating in a biblical mission. And the other volunteers certainly had no clue that just months later, Rohan would set fire to one of Islam's holiest sites, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. He believed he was preparing for the Second Coming, but he was actually stoking the highest level Middle East crisis since the Arab-Israeli War 2 years earlier. Rohan pleaded not guilty to the crime due to insanity and was subsequently deported from Israel. One of the latest suspected cases of Jerusalem syndrome came in 2017, when Irish tourist Oliver McAfee vanished in Israel's Negev desert. The 29-year-old traveled there to complete a pilgrimage on bicycle along the 631-mile Israel National Trail, but unfortunately he never returned home. Hikers found McAfee's tent, clothes, bike, and other equipment abandoned. Reported sightings continued, but search teams failed to find him. Volunteers helping with the search also came across passages that were torn out of the Bible and weighed down by rocks, as well as papers containing handwritten scripture and a makeshift chapel. The documents suggest that McAfee was performing unusual rituals or having a spiritual experience that isn't typical of even the most devout worshippers, indicating that perhaps he disappeared on purpose. His family disagreed that Jerusalem Syndrome was a possibility, claiming that his mental state seemed fine before the trip, and instead suspected that he was the victim of foul play. Sadly, he remains missing to this day, so nobody can say for sure why he vanished. 5. Michael Boatwright. In early 2013, a transient was found unconscious in a motel room in Palm Springs, California. He was taken to a local hospital, where he woke up and didn't know who he was. The man thought his name was Johan Ek, and he only understood and spoke Swedish, despite being found with documents identifying him as a 61-year-old US Navy veteran named Michael Boatwright. With nowhere else to go, he lived at the hospital for several months. Any memories of his past, including the identities of his family members, failed to return. At one point, staff suspected Boatwright was faking amnesia, but no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't trick him into speaking English or showing any sign that he understood it. Longtime friend Gifford Searles told Vice that Boatwright had recently moved back to the US from China, where he was living and working as an English teacher until his visa expired. He never readjusted to life in America and soon became a drifter who struggled to get and keep a job. Searles implied that he believed Boatwright was faking his amnesia, which seemed to be the general consensus at the hospital, but was a topic of conversation that people seemed to avoid. Boatwright thought he'd fit in better in Sweden, so the Department of Social Services bought him a one-way ticket there and sent him on his way. Several months after arriving, he told the local press that he was happy in his new home in the port city of Uddevalla. Unfortunately, he was only in the country for less than a year before the sad and confusing final chapter of his life came to an end. 4. Rebecca Press. 31-year-old Rebecca Press was drunk, high on drugs, and had just found out that her recent ex had cheated on her when she lost control of her emotions during a night of drinking in Caerphilly, Wales in 2022. She'd just arrived back at her mother's house, along with her mum's best friend, 57-year-old Mark Ash, when they ran into Rebecca's brother. He was the one who told Rebecca about the affair, and afterward, all hell broke loose. Ash tried to calm the hysterical woman down, only to have a 3-inch knife plunged into his chest. After stabbing him, Rebecca fled and hid in a bush. Police arrived at the crime scene at around 2 o'clock in the morning, and they captured Rebecca about an hour later. She pretended to be surprised and acted like she didn't understand what was going on, but the police weren't fooled by her performance. Ash died from his injuries, despite doctors' best efforts to save him, and Rebecca was charged with murder. She argued in court that she acted in self-defense, and while the judge acknowledged that the murder wasn't premeditated, she concluded that Rebecca knew exactly what she was doing and acted with intent. As a result, Rebecca was convicted of the charge and sentenced to life with a minimum of 20 years. 3. Tony Thomas. 45-year-old Tony Thomas was so passionate about the pigs he raised on his family's farm in Gwynedd, Wales, that he became infuriated when he discovered that his father, 65-year-old Dafydd Thomas, was thinking about bringing some more animals onto the property. Thomas was worried that the new animals would bring potentially life-threatening disease to the farm. He'd also stopped taking his bipolar medication more than a year and a half earlier and was in an especially agitated state of mind. No longer capable of containing his rage, Tony brutally attacked his father in March of 2021. He yanked Dafydd out of a vehicle and threw him to the ground, then proceeded to kick him and stomp on his skull. By the time Dafydd's wife discovered him and summoned help, it was too late to save his life. Tony was charged with murder, but denied killing his father. The judge ultimately dropped the murder charge due to Tony's mental health history and tasked the jury with considering him for a manslaughter conviction. He was found guilty, but with diminished responsibility, and was sentenced to indefinite psychiatric punishment. While doling out the punishment, the judge acknowledged that Tony was a serious offender, but said that he believes his condition is treatable and that he could possibly rejoin society someday. He'll remain hospitalized until or unless he's officially deemed to no longer be a threat to the public. 2. Neil O'Dowd. Pub manager Paul Smith was working at a bar in the Irish village of Baldoyle when a former employee, 35-year-old Neil O'Dowd, confronted him in early 2021. O'Dowd asked Smith why he went to Mauritius on his honeymoon. He hadn't, but O'Dowd was convinced that his former boss was somehow involved in the unsolved murder of an Irish woman in the country. Plagued by his own ill-conceived notions, the irrationally angry ex-employee stabbed Smith 19 times, smashed glasses over his head, and beat him with a mop handle. A worker tried to intervene, but there was little he could do to stop the unhinged, violent outburst. Smith was seriously injured and required emergency surgery, but miraculously survived the frenzied attack. Police arrested O'Dowd, who said during questioning that he heard voices in his head and thought his TV was bugged. He also brought up his belief in conspiracy theories and said that he remembered getting into a fight with Smith, but he couldn't recall what it was about. People who knew O'Dowd remembered noticing that he became increasingly paranoid in the weeks leading up to the murder. During his trial, the question wasn't whether O'Dowd committed the attack, but rather whether he understood the difference between right and wrong at that moment and knew what he was doing. They also tried to determine if he wasn't responsible for his actions due to his mental state. In the end, O'Dowd was found not guilty by reason of insanity in early 2023. The next steps will involve determining the correct course of treatment for his mental state, while also considering public safety. 1. Weng Saw. Terror ripped through the streets of Brooklyn in early 2023 when a man driving a U-Haul truck slammed on the gas and rammed into whatever and whoever was in his path. The rampage lasted for over an hour, leaving one person dead and 8 others injured. It finally ended when police managed to disable the vehicle. Officers arrested 62-year-old Weng Saw, who reportedly drove the U-Haul from Las Vegas, where he lives, all the way to New York City. He visited his son, who lives in Brooklyn's Bay Ridge neighborhood, and they apparently got into an altercation. At that point, police believe Saw experienced a psychotic break, which triggered the devastating massacre. The suspect allegedly claimed that he saw an invisible object pass toward his vehicle, which is thought to have triggered his episode. Some investigators have speculated that Saw had a death wish, but like it or not, he survived the needless violence, and he faces charges of second-degree murder and 7 counts of attempted murder. Saw's criminal history consists of at least 8 prior arrests dating back to 2002 and includes allegations of evading police, domestic battery, battery with a deadly weapon, and more. However, it's unclear whether any details about his past can shed light on what triggered his most recent destructive act.
9. Tara Lambert. Former model Tara Lambert found herself entangled in a child custody dispute with the mother of her 2 stepchildren in 2015. To solve the problem, Tara decided to have Kelly Cook killed. She reached out to a high school classmate to see if they knew anyone willing to do the job, and soon met up with the supposed hitman in a parking lot, where she paid a $125 down payment to make Kelly go away. During the conversation, Lambert suggested putting Kelly in, like one of those lumberjack chopper things. Before parting ways, she told the hitman how excited she was. Little did Lambert know, her former classmate had gone straight to the police after being propositioned about the murder-for-hire plot. And the hitman was an undercover cop. Law enforcement had also started recording Lambert's phone calls with the former classmate. She was swiftly arrested following the meeting with the undercover cop, and swore under questioning that she only wanted Kelly Cook to be hurt, not killed. But investigators had listened to the entire conversation, and prosecutors were more than happy to play it for a jury and let them decide. The jury found Lambert guilty. During her sentencing hearing, she rolled her eyes at the judge, interrupted him, and shook her head incredulously. Her original sentence of 7 years was overturned, earning her a new trial. She pleaded guilty during the second trial and received a 5-year sentence. 8. Amy Bessie. Robert Bessie was driving along a Las Vegas highway one morning in 2012 when out of nowhere a bullet struck his neck. Luckily, he survived and was able to tell police that the shot came from a vehicle that looked like an SUV that belonged to his brother-in-law's girlfriend. Further investigation revealed that Robert's estranged wife, Amy Bessie, had plotted to kill her husband. She recruited her 22-year-old son, Michael Bessie, and her brother, 40-year-old Richard Pearson, to get the job done. Amy was hit with 7 felony charges in connection with the botched assassination attempt, including conspiracy and attempted murder. Pearson and Michael Bessie were also charged. In exchange for their guilty pleas, the men were each sentenced to 8 to 20 years in prison. But Amy maintained her innocence throughout her trial, claiming that Robert beat her but that she didn't conspire to murder him. She even spoke of an incident where she had a gun in her purse and was feeling fed up with Robert's behavior, but exercised enough self-control not to shoot him. Prosecutors, on the other hand, accused Amy of wanting the victim dead so she could cash in on a $250,000 life insurance policy. The jury found her guilty of all 7 charges, and she was sentenced to 13 to 44 years in prison. 7. David Harris. David Harris was a successful British TV producer before he destroyed his own life trying to make his partner of 27 years permanently disappear. He decided that he no longer wanted to be with Hazel Allinson after meeting and becoming obsessed with a 28-year-old prostitute named Ugne Sekaviciute, who was less than half his age. During the affair, Harris went broke spoiling Sekaviciute. After running out of his own money, he drained Allison's bank account of £50,000 and began borrowing money from members of his community. He knew it was only a matter of time before he could no longer hide his infidelity, and he also became desperate to continue funding Sekaviciute's lifestyle. In his mind, having Allinson killed made perfect sense because it would eliminate her from the picture and give him access to the rest of her money. Harris first approached a mechanic named Chris May, who allegedly owed him money, and offered to let him square away his debts by carrying out a hit on Allison. May wanted no part of the plot and went out of his way to try warning the victim. Next, Harris offered a man named Duke Dean a 6-figure payout in exchange for killing Allison. Dean went to the London police, who arranged for him to introduce Harris to an undercover cop posing as a hitman. Harris took the bait and met up with the supposed contract killer, who secretly recorded their conversation. When law enforcement went to arrest Harris the next day, they found him naked in bed with his mistress. He tried claiming in court that he wasn't seriously looking for a hitman, but that he was doing research for a crime novel he planned to write. Harris adamantly maintained his innocence even after being sentenced to 17 years behind bars, with the earliest possibility of release in 2026. Sadly, Allison reportedly supports his ongoing fight to regain his freedom and even visits him in prison. 6. Doppelganger murder. In a case that seems too bizarre to be real, a 23-year-old German woman known as Sharaban K is being accused of faking her death by murdering a beauty influencer who looked shockingly similar to her. According to authorities, Sharaban searched online for a lookalike until she came across the victim, Khadija O. In August of 2022, she contacted Khadija under the guise of giving her some beauty supplies and allegedly stabbed her more than 50 times. Sharaban reportedly abandoned her Mercedes in a wooded area with the victim's body inside. When the police discovered the crime scene, they initially believed the remains belonged to the perpetrator. An autopsy found that the victim was actually Khadija, and an investigation of her social media activity led police to suspect that Sharaban was the killer. She had gone into hiding with her boyfriend, Shakir K., who is accused of helping her carry out the crime and faces potential prison time if found guilty. Authorities believe Sharaban faked her death due to ongoing family issues, but didn't elaborate on the exact nature of their suspicions. If convicted, she could face life in prison. 5. Ethan Melzer. As a seemingly all-American Army recruit from Louisville, Kentucky, Ethan Melzer didn't exactly fit the profile for a typical terrorism suspect, but he actively plotted with members of a satanic white supremacist group called the Order of Nine Angels, or O9A, to have members of his unit killed during an overseas deployment in 2020. As the unit's departure date approached, Melzer shared details about their planned location, movement, and security. In reality, however, he wasn't really chatting with members of O9A, but with government informants who worked to stop Melzer from accessing real terrorist groups who might actually bring his plans to fruition. In a statement, U.S. Attorney Audrey Strauss said that Melzer sought to orchestrate a murderous ambush on his unit by unlawfully disclosing its location, strength, and armaments to O9A members online. Strauss went on to describe Melzer as the enemy within and alleged that he was motivated by racism and hatred. An outline detailing Melzer's planned defense claimed that he was merely indulging in an internet fantasy and that he never planned for an attack to really occur. But his lawyers never ended up using the argument in court because he abruptly pleaded guilty within days of his scheduled trial. His convictions include attempting to murder U.S. military members, attempting to provide and providing material support to terrorists, and illegally transmitting national defense information, believing that it could be used to the injury of the United States. Melzer faces up to 45 years in prison and is scheduled for sentencing in early 2023. 4. Nancy Gelber. As an aspiring crime novelist, Nancy Mancuso Gelber thought she knew a lot about how police investigations work, and she convinced herself that she could get away with a murder-for-hire plot against her husband, Joseph Jody Richard Gelber Jr. At the time, the couple were estranged but living under the same roof. Jody had gotten sick of Nancy's partying and filed for divorce. He was intent on keeping his house and other assets that he owned before the marriage. Nancy attempted to put a hit out on Jody in 2011. She met the alleged hitman Dwight through her drug dealer, unaware that the dealer was acting as an informant and that Dwight was an undercover cop. During the conversation, she described how she'd killed Jody by cutting off certain body parts if it were up to her. She promised a $60,000 cut of her husband's life insurance payout as a payment for the hit and gave her wedding ring as collateral. Police delivered a false death notification to Nancy the next day. They later described her reaction as overly dramatic and like it seemed staged. Nancy agreed to go down to the police station under the guise of providing information about her husband. But once she was there, investigators confronted and arrested her. She was found guilty of solicitation to commit capital murder. She was found guilty of solicitation to commit capital murder and was sentenced to 30 years in prison, with the earliest possibility of parole in 2026. 3. Malcolm McGregor. Malcolm McGregor's partner of 27 years, Cheryl Coey, reported him missing from their home in Motherwell, Scotland in 2018 after he failed to arrive home from an alleged visit with relatives just 34 miles, 55 kilometers away. The couple were childhood sweethearts who had 2 children together, and there was no reason to suspect he would disappear for any reason other than foul play. Relatives reportedly found Malcolm's car abandoned, and he wasn't answering his phone, leading his family to fear the worst. But police quickly determined that he had flown 4,500 miles, 7,242 kilometers, away to Utah, where he married a woman Cheryl had never heard of before. By then, photos of the newlyweds had appeared on social media. Since he wasn't committing a crime, there was nothing more that law enforcement could do. leaving Cheryl to confront the heartbreaking reality of what had really happened. In hindsight, she realized that McGregor may have been involved with his new bride, Belle Valak, for 2 years leading up to his seemingly staged disappearance. Cheryl even suspected that he had gone to visit Valak at least once before while claiming he was in England. By all appearances, it was alleged that McGregor may have had all the details of his new life planned out well in advance of his departure. When reporters from the Scottish Sun contacted a man by his name for comment, they were met with a foul-mouthed response and a threat to contact lawyers. In 2020, the news outlet reported that McGregor had fathered a child with his new wife. 2. Artie Devi. In 2015, a concerned father reported his 25-year-old daughter, Artie Devi, missing in Mathura, India. When a murdered body was found, he identified it as Devi based on photographs and clothing. There was no autopsy, and the remains were cremated. Unbeknownst to the young woman's father, she had married a man named Sonu Saini shortly before her disappearance. Saini and 2 alleged accomplices, Bhagwan Singh and Arvind Pathak, were arrested on suspicion of murder. Saini was sentenced to 18 months in prison, while Singh received a 9-month prison sentence for their alleged roles in the crime, and the local police received a monetary award for solving the case and bringing the suspects to justice. After serving his time, Saini went to the police and said that Devi had left him just days after their wedding, after an argument over property. He and Singh insisted they were innocent, and to prove it, they set out to find Devi, who they suspected was alive and well. Their search led them to the town of Dausa in central India, where they found Devi living with a new husband. This isn't the only case of its kind to make headlines in recent years. In 2022, police found a 21-year-old woman living with a second husband in Andhra Pradesh after she vanished on her second wedding anniversary to her first husband. An exhaustive search followed her disappearance, only for authorities to realize she was fine and accuse her of wasting government resources. In an even crazier case, a woman who walked out of her family home at 18 years old was found living in a home just a few hundred meters away. 11 years later, she left because she wanted to be with a man from a different religion and thought her loved ones would disapprove. During her absence, she remained hidden in a room at her partner's family home, only coming out during the day when nobody was there and sneaking out through the window to use the bathroom. By the time she was discovered, locals had more or less forgotten about the young woman and were shocked to learn she'd been living right under their noses all along. 1. Daniel Schwartz. Attorney Mike McCulloch was shocked when federal agents showed up at his Michigan home early one morning in 2019 and told him that his life was in danger. A local doctor named Daniel Schwartz was allegedly plotting to murder McCulloch with a fatal dose of fentanyl after losing $60,000 in a case that the victim litigated. McCulloch later told news station WXYZ that it was the first time in his 35-year law career that anything like this had ever happened. Fentanyl is an extremely potent synthetic opioid. Just a few sand-sized granules of the drug can kill someone, and it's responsible for record numbers of overdose deaths that have occurred in the US in recent years. And while courts throughout the country are increasingly holding drug dealers accountable for fentanyl-related fatalities, this marked one of the first cases of it being at the center of a murder-for-hire plot. Schwartz was already under investigation for suspected possession when a recovering addict told the feds that the doctor had approached her about killing McCulloch. He allegedly asked her if she'd be willing to covertly administer a lethal mix of fentanyl and Xanax while pretending to accidentally bump into the victim in public. Authorities also accused Schwartz of plotting to frame his own lawyer for the crime by planting fentanyl in his car because he was upset with the attorney's representation in the lawsuit that he lost. The witness said she thought Schwartz was just venting until he became persistent, at which point she went to the police. She cooperated with the FBI and helped gather enough evidence to arrest Schwartz. He ultimately pleaded guilty to a drug charge and was sentenced to 16 months in prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. Thanks for watching. Would you rather find out you were the target of a foiled murder-for-hire plot, or be fired from a high-paying job based on a coworker's false allegations? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you soon. Bye.